Good afternoon, Year 3. I hope you're well and looking forward to today's history session. Today, we're going to move on with our knowledge and our learning relating to ancient Egypt. We're going to learn about the structure of society back then, and we're going to think a little bit about which role within that society you'd like. Part of this will be that we'll have to think about what society means. So don't worry if there's any words that I use that you're finding a bit tricky. We should go through them as we go through this PowerPoint and this little video. Okay. Right, guys. So success in this lesson would be we identify what society is. So we understand what society is. We understand the different roles and responsibilities that people had. So what was the job that people did? And we clarify, so we make it clear which role would be most attractive. That doesn't mean which would be prettiest. It means which would pull us in, which job would we like out of that society. Okay, guys, as we look through then, we're going to begin with about years. We're going to think about the years that ancient Egypt was around in, was the main society then. Now, the thing I just wanted to remind you about is that idea of before, so BC and AD, remembering that those years BC are just over 2,000 years ago. Now, we are currently in 2021 AD, Anno Domini, okay? So that means that 2021 years ago was the line between the AD and the BC years. So BC would be before. So if we just think about that, there was no BC, no zero BC. Just remind you, one BC ended and it went straight to AD one. But if we look at these years, we can see which one will be first. Would it be 10 BC or AD 10? Which would be first? So which would be the furthest one in the past? Have a think. Well done for those of you who've remembered. Yeah, 10 BC would be 20 years before AD 10. Okay, so that gap of 20 years. AD 10 is only 2011 years ago. Okay, so just thinking a little bit about that. Now, with that, that should help us because now we know some elements of when the ancient Egyptian time was. Okay, so if we look in this timeline, it'll help us in a second. If we look, first of all, we're currently just a little bit after AD 2000, 21 years since then. Okay, I find it funny that you all weren't born then, but I was born then, and I imagine most of your mums and dads were. Okay, so 21 years ago, it was AD 2000. Okay, 2,000 years before then, it had been 1 AD or 1 BC the year before. Okay, now ancient Egyptian period started when people settled in what was the valley called? Can anybody remember the name of that valley? Well done if you knew it was the Nile Valley, where the rivers that went through it was the Nile. Now, although this is in our recall session, we actually haven't looked at the Nile Valley yet. So we will look at the Nile and the River Nile that cuts through Egypt, which is in North Africa. And we'll look at that over the next few weeks. We looked, though, when the ancient Egyptian civilization was in place last week, and we found out that it wasn't in the year 2000, which is 21 years ago now. It was how many years BC? Can anybody remember? It was just over. It was about 3,500 years BC. If you add that onto our 2,000 years and 21, it's more than 5,000 years ago. More than 5,000 years ago. Okay, it ended when the Roman Empire took over. The timeline gives us a bit of a clue. Can anybody remember when that was? Great stuff, in 30 BC. So just 2,051 years ago, the Romans took over, and that meant the end of the Egyptian Empire. The Egyptian Empire. Now, as I said, there's a word that was in our key question today, society. And I thought that's a tricky word for year threes. I know you're super smart guys, so you'll be fine. But I actually thought it's a tricky word for Mr. Spring. So what I'll do is I'll try and unpick what that word means. I'm just going to move my face so that I'm not blocking the screen for the bits that you need to see for this. So society, when we define that, what it means is a group of people. A society is a group of people. Now, we look at the word society, so the beginning part of it looks a little bit like some other words. I'm not thinking of the things on my under my shoes. I'm thinking of social. If I talk about being social, normally it means something where I'm seeing people, I'm socializing, I see other people. Now, obviously, we don't do that at the moment because of COVID. But if we were in the world before COVID or after we've all been sorted out, we would socialize where we'd see other people. And you can only do that when you're part of a society. Now, here's a group of hands showing a society where lots of people are together. Maybe they're raising their hands to push something up. I'm not sure what the picture shows. That's an image to get the idea of society. So a synonym, a word which means the same as society, might be a word like group or collective. So a group of people are society. An antonym is the opposite. So an individual is the opposite of the society. And then a usage of it. The whole of society has helped with the response to COVID. I know some of your mums and dads are doing jobs which are helping people. They might be delivering food, delivering drink. They might be helping people in hospitals. They might be working in places and helping people. And even if we're just doing the right thing by staying at home and not seeing people, that is helping. And we're society. All the people in Britain about a British society, all the people in the world are part of the world society. It's a society. Okay. But the society of ancient Egypt was organized in a specific way that's different to how our societies were organized. Move me up there to the top. That's not where I am in society, I assure you guys, but let's have a look. Now, do you know who the most important people were? See if we figure that out. Any ideas? If you don't worry. We're about to find out. Now, this is what our society would look like in Egypt. At the moment, the blue strip is covering the key names of the people at the top and the bottom. But you can see that the pharaoh is the most important in Egyptian society. Now, the pharaoh was like a king or queen. It owned everything and had control over every aspect of how the country was won. Okay, they were the most important and rich people in Egypt. So they were the most important. After that, there were the viziers, the viziers. They were the most powerful people in Egypt after the pharaoh. Okay, they helped the pharaoh run the country and also acted as the judges in the high court. All the other people, so everybody else had to do what they said, apart from the pharaoh, who was like their boss. Okay. After that, we've got the nobles. Now, some of you might see a word like noble still being used now. And some of you know that in London, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson is an MP, a member of Parliament. Now, they sit on the green seats in the Houses of Commons. The other House of Parliament is the House of Lords, where they sit on red seats. And the people in the House of Lords get to vote on laws as well. And the people in the House of Lords are also called nobles. Nobles. So we've still got that word used today. And when we describe somebody as being noble, it normally means that they're doing the right thing. They're making a noble choice. So the nobles. Nobles, they ran little areas. And that's a little bit like how the word noble is in English when we use it in England, because hundreds of years ago, the king had nobles running the different counties and places for him. There might have been a noble in charge of Erdington, and there would have been a noble who we would have had to do what we were told if we were in the area of Brookvale. They make the laws that were local, and that means that it was passed down from one family member to another, a hereditary position. It wasn't something you got voted for or you didn't do an interview for it. It was a hereditary position, and your son or daughter, normally son, would get it. Unfortunately, it was a bit sexist back then. So lots of very smart girls didn't get to be the noble and who was in charge, which is a shame. Okay, then we've got the priests. Okay, priests were very important, and they were the ancient Egyptians believed there were many gods, and the priests were responsible. Their job was to keep the gods happy. They spent their time performing all these rituals, so doing things and ceremonies in the temples. They also performed what's called funeral rites, where when somebody died, they did something to commemorate, to remember that person. They didn't really talk to people though. They did these special ceremonies, but they didn't do big meetings like we might see priests in churches and in other temples of worship today. After that, we've got the scribes, the soldiers, the craftsmen, and the farmers. So the scribes are important because they're the only people who could read and write. They kept records, which was really important, and they used three ways of writing: hieroglyphics, demontic, and hieratic. And we'll look at hieroglyphics particularly over the next few weeks. With soldiers, they were responsible for looking after things, making sure Egypt had lots of enemies. It was really brave and heroic to do that. And you might, because you were being brave, you might get given land or special riches. There were craftsmen, they made things, pottery, weavers, jewelry, make lots of things. And you might, if you were really skilled, make something for the royal family, and where they were buried in their rich tombs. So when they got buried, the members of the pharaoh's family, they would get buried with lots of riches. Also, we had farmers. Now, they didn't own the land, but for the pharaoh or for the nobles or for the other rich people, they gave them food or they gave them clothes, and in return, they were allowed to farm the land. They borrowed the land and they kind of paid rent. Most of the people in Egypt were farmers. Now, when we mentioned the Nile earlier, the Nile was really important for farmers because it meant that there was sufficient water, there was enough water for people to grow things and allow animals to live there. Does anybody know what the last group that's covered in blue is? Beneath in the order of society in Egyptian time, beneath the farmers. Shout it out if you know what it is. Well done if you've identified slaves. Now, slaves were people who'd been captured. They didn't have a choice to be working for somebody. They worked in the houses of the pharaoh and rich noble families. They were given sometimes to priests to do jobs for them. You couldn't be bought or sold as a slave. It was different to when slaves were used by other people later on in society. So even as recently as the 19th century in America, there were still slaves then. There was no way of buying or selling slaves though back then. Sometimes, if your boss died, your owner died as a slave in ancient Egyptian time, you would be killed so that you could go with your boss into the afterlife, because that was part of the belief system. So it wouldn't be very good if your boss was killed. Okay, you had no property and you were not allowed to get married. You had no freedom, no liberty. Which group do you think you'd like to be in? Have a think. Pause the video while you think. Which would you like to have done? Anybody fancy being a slave? I don't. Pharaoh sounds great. When we do our last task, I'm going to ask you not to be the Pharaoh. You can be any other job but the Pharaoh. Okay. Now, what you're going to do, so bits of work. First job, you're going to find out which bit's which. So you're just going to cut these out. You can use some scissors if you want, and you're going to cut these out, and you're going to match the job title or the role in society to the description. Okay. So that's the first one. So you can just remember the different jobs that people did. The second job, I think, is a bit more exciting. Now, the second job, what you're going to do is you're going to do a job advert for somebody doing a job. Now, this is a job advert for a teacher. You've got a very strange picture of a teacher at the top of it, and you've got to draw a picture of doing that job role. Then you've got to describe in the red section, and you can use any colour. You've got to describe the key responsibilities. So I've said for a teacher, the key responsibility is giving children information whilst they complete work. The skills, you need to understand how to solve problems. And then the green bit says the attraction. So what might make you want to do this? So this one on the right hand side is a job description. And your job is going to be to do a job description for one of these Egyptian roles. Which role are you going to give a job to? As I said, I'd like you not to do Pharaoh because I think that's the most tempting one. Any other job, so vizier, noble, priest, scribe, soldier, craftsman, farmer, or even if you really want slave, you're going to do a picture of the person doing the job, and then you're going to do a description of the responsibilities, the skills, and the attractions of the role. Don't worry, guys, though, you won't have a big picture of me on yours when you're doing that. What you'll have is a nice empty page, and when you've got your empty page, you're going to fill it in with a picture of one of those people from Egyptian society, and then you're going to send it through to Miss Ashford to have a look at and complete the red, black, and green sections, please. I really look forward to seeing those guys. Thank you for listening so well. See you soon, year 3.